is Mark Hirsch, and I'm the guy that's responsible for the book That Tree. And yeah, I call it my unintended adventure. It's just one of those things that kind of evolved. I certainly never set out with the intention of publishing a book. So, you know, I always start out with this comment, you know, the path of life is building many roads, the trick is knowing which one to take. And I don't know, I just, you know, I've never let my decisions be dictated by anybody else. I've trusted in my heart, and I've trusted in my game plan, and it seems like I've always taken the right path. And with this one, it's proven to be a very successful path in many ways. So I graduated from college in 1986 from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. And I even think back, when I enrolled in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was a sophomore in college, and I was going to take a backpacking trip. And a friend of mine, and I'll tell you this, and this is kind of, it leads to how I became a photographer. So I'm in 8th grade, and they had one of these career days, and during the career day, my 8th grade algebra teacher brought in a bunch of backpacking equipment, and she was showing us, you know, all this lightweight gear, and showed us pictures and talked about her backpacking trips. And that sounds interesting. So as a sophomore in college, my twin brother and I decided we're going to go on a backpacking trip. We're thinking back to Jane Howell, this teacher, and we weren't necessarily inspired by algebra. We were definitely inspired by her hobbies and her interests. So my twin brother and I decided we're going to go on a backpacking trip. And as a result of that backpacking trip, I told another friend who was actually my 8th grade science teacher. His name is Bob Nelson. And Bob was like, well, you can't go on a backpacking trip if you don't, and not take a camera. He goes, you need to get a 35mm camera. Well, I never had a camera in my life. So I'm like, well, I don't know anything about buying a camera. So he connected me with an old classmate, and I bought a camera. So I took this backpacking trip and figured out how to use the camera and made a bunch of images. And I came back, and it was going to be my second semester of my sophomore year of college, and I, at that point, decided, I wonder if I can possibly, is there an option in college to pursue something that would utilize this new discovery of photography? And sure enough, UW-Platteville had a communications program with an emphasis in photography, and it was geared more towards photojournalism. And so I tell that story because, are there any teachers in the room? Oh, yeah, great, great. And I tell that story because you guys really make a difference. Teachers make a difference. And you think about it, an algebra teacher and a science teacher inspired me, not scientifically and not mathematically, but they did inspire me and they did influence me. And eventually I became a photographer, and I found my career path because of something totally separate from their fields of interest as teachers, but because they inspired me. And so you make a difference. Thank you to all the teachers in the room. So anyway, so I graduated with a communications degree in 1986, and I was hired for my first job at the Ottumwa Courier in Ottumwa, Iowa. I don't know if any of you have been to Ottumwa. It's kind of a rough town. It was a great place to work as a newspaper photographer, but it wasn't necessarily my favorite place I've ever lived in my life. Sorry if there's anybody who's got deep roots in Ottumwa. But I'm in the darkroom one night, and the phone rings, and it was Dale Stearman. He was the photo editor at the Telegraph-Herald in Dubuque, and I had interned there when I was in college. And Dale was calling me to say, hey, we have a position open if you want it. And my wife at that time was working at a frame shop, and she had a marketing degree and couldn't really find a job in Ottumwa. I didn't even call her. I asked Dale, I said, when can I start? And I set it on the calendar. I was going to be there in 2 weeks. Drove home that night and told my wife, we're moving to Dubuque. And she was not upset. So in 1987, I landed what I considered my dream job, and I got hired by the Telegraph-Herald. It's a phenomenal photo newspaper. Historically, it was one of the best small papers in the country for its use of photography. So it was a pretty exciting accomplishment for me. So I worked my way up the ranks. In 1993, I was promoted to photo editor, and then in 2003, I was promoted to visuals editor. So I achieved pretty much all the goals I could career-wise with that company. And I say life was good, but then change happens. We just never know, guys, you know. Nothing is permanent, nothing is certain. Friday, October 13th, 2006, I lost my job. So after 19 years, I'm on the streets. I'm 48 years old. I'm a photojournalist. I was a visuals editor. Newspapers are a challenging, struggling industry to begin with. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? And my family certainly wasn't excited at that point about uprooting and moving. my kids were in high school at that point, and you know that'd be pretty disruptive for them. So I established a freelance career. I had a lot of connections in the industry. I created opportunities that way, and you know, pulled myself up by the bootstraps and made things happen. I never collected a dime of unemployment. I mean, I hit the ground running. So I tell people, don't be defined by the adversity, be defined by how you deal with it. And that's just how I've always done things. So I translated that into escaping from the traditional newspaper thing, because newspapers don't pay that well, even if you're doing freelance work for newspapers. And it was during the caucus year. It was 2007, 2008. So you know what Iowa was like during the caucuses. I mean, I did spend a lot of time doing journalistic stuff. I was chasing political candidates for 2 years. But in the meantime, I was trying to build a new customer base. And so I managed to build a great customer base with seed corn companies, John Deere Corporation. You know, you think about where we live. I mean, it's a beautiful country. Farm families are some of the most pleasant people to spend time with and photograph. It's scenic. It was really a great deal. One of my clients was a regional division of Monsanto Company. They bought up a bunch of these small family-owned seed companies around the Midwest. And I was in Minnesota, and I was in Watertown, South Dakota for 4 days making pictures. And I just had phenomenal light, phenomenal conditions. It was a beautiful harvest. And the last day of my shoot, made these photos, and I'm heading back to my hotel in Watertown, South Dakota, and I'm 2 blocks from my hotel. And I remember there was a Starbucks. I was going to grab a coffee. I was going to head to my hotel, and I was going to take a shower, and I was going to get up at 6 o'clock the next morning and make the long drive back to Wisconsin. I remember it's a 4-lane road going through town. It was a 35-mile-an-hour road, and I was on an inside lane. And I remember there was a van or a truck in front of me, and I remember I was checking lanes. And the last thing I remember is the song by the Eagles, Victim of Love, was on the radio. Why I remember that, I have no idea. But I signaled to make a lane change, and next thing I hear is a woman's voice, and she says, "Sir, sir, are you okay?" And then I heard it again. She said, "Sir, sir, are you okay?" And you never imagine yourself being the victim of a near-death experience. You know, we all feel pretty impervious. But I was. I was a victim of an insane situation. There was a concrete truck, and he had 4 concrete chutes elevated from his truck behind him. And right when I made the lane change, he's driving on the shoulder of the road, so they're hanging 16 feet up from his truck. And right when I made a lane change, he turned off the shoulder of the road into the construction site. Those concrete chutes swung out into traffic, and they javelin right through my windshield and hit me in the head. Took the headrest off my seat. And it, you know, my momentum tore the chutes off the truck, and I kept driving for 150 yards down the highway unconscious. And the woman whose voice I heard, her name is Shelly Eichens, and Shelly thought I was a goner. She said I was slumped over the wheel, my eyes were wide open, and my truck just kept right on going. So, kind of turned my life on a tailspin. You know, I certainly never envisioned myself being in that situation, but here I found myself in a really bad way. You know, messed me up mentally, messed me up physically. So I'm laying low. My physician says, "Mark, you can't be doing any commercial work. You have a severe concussion, your body, your mind, emotionally, you've got to recover from this." So it was in October. So in January, I had an old Treo smartphone, which is a really old first version of the smartphones, and it was really durable. And I'm not a guy that buys new equipment. I don't chase technology. But that thing was on its last leg, so I remember I went into Sprint and I traded it in, and I got a Samsung phone. And I had it for about 2 weeks, and I realized this thing is really frail. I'm going to break it. And you know, as a newspaper guy, a creative guy, I'm Mac-based with everything I do. So I remember I went into the Sprint store, and the Sprint guys saw me coming. They knew what was going on. They started teasing me, "You're trading that back in on an Apple iPhone, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." So I got an iPhone. I posted on my Facebook page. How many of you have Facebook pages? A few of you, okay. So I posted on my Facebook page that I got an iPhone. And Corey Peppelenjack is a good friend of mine from Minneapolis. She's a photographer, and she sends me a note that day. "Isn't the camera great?" I laughed at her. I'm like, "I didn't buy a camera. I bought a cell phone." And she's like, "No, seriously, treat it like a camera." So that very day, January 20th, I'm driving home. I've driven by this tree for 19 years and I've never once made a picture of it. But Corey's message is ringing in my head. I parked my truck, ran down there in the snowstorm, pulled out my iPhone, and I was still doing the poke the screen technique, which is not very stable. As a photographer, you want to hold your camera stable. But I made a half a dozen pictures of the tree, went back home, and I wasn't even sure how to get them off the camera. And I remember I tapped on one and it gave you an option to email it to yourself. So I emailed it to myself. This opened on my laptop and I was blown away. Here it is, it's an 8 megapixel image file. And I think back in the mid-90s when I was still at the Telegraph-Herald, I remember spending the company's money. I spent $15,000 on the first version of the high-end digital cameras. It was made by Kodak, Canon, and the Associated Press. And I'm not kidding, it was as big as the old receiver type, you know, home telephones. It was huge, and it was 2 megapixel. This is an item as big as a wallet, and it's 8 megapixel. And it's beautiful quality. So as a photographer, I had stopped making pictures for me after college. The only time I really used my cameras was when I was working for a client. And I'm not able to work for clients right now. I'm laying low recovering from my injury, so I'm like, oh, you know what, this was kind of neat. It's always with me, so I got inspired. I started just intentionally for me, started looking for an opportunity to make a picture a day, whatever it might be. It was always something different. You know, it kind of ran the gamut, just kind of artsy stuff. And it really wasn't a style of photography I had ever pursued. As a photojournalist, everything I always did was for a story or for an event. It was a totally different approach to photography. But it was good for me because it got me behind at least some form of camera making pictures again. So it's March 13th and I haven't made my personal picture yet. I remember I'm driving home and there's this unbelievable sunset. And I'm looking at that sunset going, oh, I need something between me and that sunset. I'm looking for a barn or a windmill, I don't know, looking for something. And I turned onto Airport Road where I'd made that first iPhone photo. And lo and behold, there was the tree. And so I walked down there. Now it's beautiful weather. Walked down there and made this picture of the tree. And I posted it to my Facebook page, good old Facebook. And 10 days later, a good friend of mine, his name is Greg Gunther. Greg sends me a note. Dude, what's with you and that tree? You should do a photo a day with it. And who knows why? I guess if Greg told me to jump off a bridge, I'd have jumped. It was the very next day, I went out and I made this picture. And at that moment, I decided, hey, I know what I'm going to be doing for my picture day, you know? It's kind of crazy. And so I was kind of inspired. And I just started finding time every day to go out there to the tree and find some fresh perspective. You know, out there before sunrise, and I still remember this. I mean, for me, it was so moving because I was still really wrestling and struggling with the challenge of my accident, my injury. I'd go out there before sunrise, and the trees kind of nestled down in a valley, and I remember I would sit there and I'd watch, and the sun would rise, and it would slowly paint its way to the base of the tree. And on this morning, you know, just before it illuminated that rise in the earth around it, I made the picture, and it just, and with that, the waning moon setting behind it, I mean, they were just really, really moving opportunities for me. I was connecting with a place. It was really a fulfilling experience. And I still really had no idea how much longer I was going to do it. And I remember, this is probably 3 weeks into the project, and all the predictable stuff, I pretty much shot it. And I realized, you know what? It doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to have the core of the tree be the focus of the compositions. So I wander another 300 yards down the valley, and I discover this old cow skull, all lichen and moss encrusted, pretty much like the same side of the tree. And again, I just started making all these interesting visual discoveries. So I can thank the two friends for inspiring me. Corey inspired me to treat the phone like a camera. Greg inspired me to do a photo a day. But at this point, I really had no idea how long I was going to do it. And Warren Winter is a friend of mine. He's been my photography agent forever. When I lost my job at the Telegraph-Herald, he was with news agencies out of New York, and he immediately put me to work. So Warren is seeing this on Facebook, and he calls me. He's like, dude, he says, I'm digging this tree thing. He said, I think if you go a year, we could publish a book. So I said to myself, well, I guess I know how long I'm going to be pursuing this project. And a month later, Warren calls me once again, and he says, Hirsch, he says, you're really going to do this. I go, what are you talking about, Warren? He says, you're really going to go a full year with this? I'm like, well, yeah. you've never steered me wrong before. And he's like, I can't believe you took me serious. There was nothing serious about it. He was baiting me. He never imagined that any photographer was crazy enough to go that duration of time. Now, of course, since we published the book, he's thrilled that I went that duration of time. He's the guy behind the project. So, you know, it was just all these incredible discoveries, and even this one, the day I made this picture, it was my sister-in-law's birthday, and I made this photo late in the day. I had actually gotten back to doing commercial photography, and I had an assignment in Dubuque, Iowa that day. I got home late. The sun has already set. You know, you get that beautiful indigo sky at dusk, and I ran out to the tree, and I'm like, oh, man, and the iPhone really doesn't do very well in low light. I'm like, what am I going to do? So I drove my truck down the waterway, and the tree is up on a hill, and I parked my truck down below the hill with my headlights shining up. And I went out in the cornfield, totally opposite of the car headlights, and this is actually a root bundle from a corn plant from the previous year's harvest, and it's just laying on the ground, and I'm down in the dirt in front of it. The tree is probably 35, 40 yards away, so it's kind of that weird, it's called foreshortening, where it compresses items and makes them look like they're one and the same. And then this is just, there's like some grasses and bushes growing beneath the tree, and it looked like a burning bush. So the night I made this, we were having a birthday party for my sister-in-law. So I went to my sister-in-law's birthday party, and the farmer that owns the land, his name is Tim Clary, he's a dear friend of mine, and I said to him, you know, we were having a conversation, I said, it just amazes me in this day and age. I mean, we're in the heart of ag country, and you guys understand that, and I think it's probably the same around here like it is in northeast Iowa by me. There are nowhere near as many livestock farmers anymore. Most guys are just reverting to grain farming because it's a lot less work, it's a lot more profitable. So they're taking out their fence lines to eke out a little bit of extra tillable ground. They're reducing their waterways for the same reason. I said to Tim, I can't believe that tree is still there. And he says, well, actually, he says in the spring, I had a bulldozer operator out there taking all the fence rows out around that cornfield. They were repairing the waterway down by the tree. There was a bunch of erosion. And he went out on a Saturday to inspect the job. And the bulldozer operator says to Tim, while I'm at it, you want me to push that tree over too? And Tim, you know, he didn't even really appreciate the significance of what I was doing, but he says to the bulldozer operator, that tree's been there for over 200 years. I'm not the guy that's going to push it over. And when he told me that, it just gave me goosebumps. I'm like, are you kidding me? And by this point, I'm about a month into the project, so yeah. But it's amazing too, and I mean, you just think about it, you know, those little pieces of habitat, those big beautiful trees. In this valley, that tree is the only remnant of the prairie, you know. I mean, it's pretty incredible to me. You know, in life and career-wise, people are always telling you, never look back. You know, you're supposed to always look forward. But as a photographer, we're always looking back. You shoot a photo assignment, you're on your way out of the building, and the light bulb goes on in your head, oh, I forgot to shoot that. That'll be a better picture. And I'm kind of the same way with the tree project. It was a beautiful morning, foggy, just really moody light. I was probably down there for an hour and a half making pictures. And I know I had some nice images, but I don't know, I'm not very good at settling for what I have. And I remember I was walking back to my truck, and I paused, and I stopped, and looked back there, admiring the tree, and pretty soon I can see this red-winged blackbird flying into the scene, and held it up and waited, and he got in the right spot, and I made a picture, and it's just, you know, so I never quit, and sometimes the best picture is the last picture. And even things like this, I'm not a landscape photographer, I'm a news photographer. For me to start recognizing these unique features, the backlit compositional opportunities, the little vignettes, the little slices of life of the tree, it was really kind of a cool experience. You know, I equate it to personal growth. It was about the discovery of all these fresh perspectives on life. And then the challenge of going out there every day and trying to come up with a new image. You cannot imagine how challenging that really was. And by this point, my family, they really don't realize what I've committed to. And I remember my wife goes to me, what are you doing? Because I'm up before sunrise, you know, every day. What are you doing? She knows I'm not doing any much commercial work. I said, oh, I'm making a picture a day of an oak tree. The question is, why? and then I know what she's thinking in the back of her head. Oh, my word, that head injury is worse than we realized. And so, you know, every little change in the landscape was something I was watching for and wanting to capitalize on to make a picture. And the day I made this photo, I made this picture, and I posted it on Facebook. And I started to just write my daily reflections, whatever my observation was. They were just, you know, like 2 or 3 sentence prose. And the day I made this picture, I think I said, that tree is surrounded by soon-to-be planted cornfields. And the next morning I got up and I saw there was a note on my Facebook page, and it was from Tim Clare, the farmer that farms the property, and it was a one-word response: planted. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I called Tim and made it very clear to him that, Tim, from now for the next year, anything you do, whether you're spraying, whether you're cultivating, please call me, because those were opportunities for a nice visual opportunity. So. And being a drought year, you can imagine, oops, sorry guys, being a drought year, you can imagine, you saw what the ag ground looked like, you saw how slow the corn grew, you can't believe the impact it had on the tree, but yet in the spring it was still very lush and green. This is just another one of those crazy observations. I can't believe I would see something like this, but the overlap of the leaves, it was a gloomy, overcast day, and I figured out ways to make the iPhone perform like more like a traditional camera, and pulled out that little vignette. It would have been an ideal Valentine's Day photo. So then I started thinking, I spent 20 years in the newspaper industry, and as a newspaper editor, you have a strong impact on the decision making. I mean, I'm dictating what I think you guys will consider important or valid or significant enough that it should be in the paper. And I talked to some of the photographers that used to work for me, and they think it's absolutely wonderful, but they think it's absolutely crazy that I committed to doing a photo a day of an oak tree, and the way that it's resonated with people, because we all agree there is no way. If one of the photographers had said to me, Mark, I want to do a picture a day of an oak tree, I probably would have had a hard time not laughing. And the same thing if I went to one of the photographers and said, I got this great idea. I want you to take a picture a day of an oak tree. There's just no way any of us ever would have embraced it. So, I've really come to realize that as a newspaper editor, sometimes our perceptions and our assumptions aren't necessarily in sync with reality, because it's incredible how many people find this appealing. I mean, look, you're all here and you're all inspired by this. So early on, every day I'd walk down there, and the red-winged blackbirds would meet me at the road, and it was like a tag team. And as I got further down the valley, I knew when it'd take over, and they'd dive by me and squawk at you. Unbelievable. And there's actually an essay in my book that I kind of reflect on that, because full circle, I mean, it was like that the entire year. And I'll jump ahead. In full circle, on the very last day of my creative project in 2013, I went down, it was the last day I was going to take a creative photo. And I went down there once again to wait and watch the sunrise. And it was very much like that moon photo that I showed you earlier, because I was trying to duplicate that composition of the tree in the snowstorm. And I remember I sat there waiting for the sunrise, and I had a composition all preconceived, had my phone on a tripod, and the sun starts cresting the hill, and it starts painting its way down the tree, and a red-winged blackbird comes in, and it lands about as far away from me as the dictionary, lands on a plant, and the sun starts coming down. Pretty soon that red-winged blackbird is singing to me, singing his welcome to the morning. So I guess I became part of that valley. So in June of 2012, I'm well into my project, and the hometown newspaper discovers it, and they contact me, hey Mark, we'd like to do a feature on your project, your Photo a Day project. And right away I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm posting these photos on my personal Facebook page. I don't have a following for that tree at that point. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to friend everybody that wants to follow my tree project. That could kind of get out of hand. So I called my twin brother. I said, John, what should I do? He said, well, create a page for that tree. Like, okay, so we created a Facebook page for that tree. This article came out. Within a week, the tree had 400 people following it. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So the power of social media, it's really pretty incredible. So in addition, I opened up an Instagram account. Instagram is kind of like Facebook, but really it's not about anything other than you post a photo. And for Instagram, I decided I would use it, I thought, hopefully to help me expand career opportunities. And so I didn't friend and connect with lots of people on Instagram just to have lots of people. I connected with photographers, photo editors, people in similar careers to mine, because I thought it might translate into some future job opportunities. The day I shot this one. So I had done a commercial photo shoot for a company, and I had a gigabyte of photos I had to upload to them. And my bandwidth where I live out in the country is not very good. And so I went into the Platteville Public Library to upload my photos. And I uploaded the photos, and of course 2012 being a drought year, you know, we didn't have much weather like this. And I remember I came out of the library, I looked at that sky, I'm like, oh my gosh, the tree is 6 miles away. So I hop in my truck, I make a beeline out there, I run down there in the field, and that sky is just a-boiling, and I made a half a dozen frames, and it blew over, and it didn't leave a drop of rain. Unbelievable.
The sky is Van Gogh.
It is very Van Gogh-ish. And this one, this is just another one of those really cool discoveries. So I'm trying to get the iPhone to perform more like a traditional camera, and it's pretty much a point and shoot. It's really got some serious limitations. And I wanted a picture of the tree with that lovely indigo sky, and I'm sitting there in the valley, I've got my phone on the tripod, and a barred owl comes and lands in the tree, and he sees me and he flies away. And of course, things like that, serious wildlife photos, you just can't do it with the iPhone because it's just too far away. But it was just one of those really cool experiences. And then the nighthawks came in straight from the valley. And again, you know, just really cool. They're pretty much right over my head when I'm laying there in the grass. And then the fireflies came out. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make a picture of fireflies? So I tried the camera app that comes with the iPhone, and it just couldn't do it. Then I've got an application I use called Camera Plus that lets you pick a place to focus and pick a place to base your exposure on, and it still wouldn't capture the fireflies. Then I had this camera app called Slow Shutter. And I think what Slow Shutter does is it stacks video stills on top of one another, kind of like a time exposure. And I'd never really used it before, but I activated it, and on screen you see a little tiny copy of the picture. And I tap the screen, it starts making a picture, and you start to see the tree come up, and right about that time, this firefly came flying through the scene. It was like somebody took a yellow paintbrush and went like that. And I verbally gasped, oh my gosh, you know. And I'm laying there in the grass, and I'm looking, and you know, you see another one, and it shows up on screen. I'm like, oh my gosh, pretty soon I'm out there in the valley, I'm heard firefly. And there's this house right up the valley from where this all takes place. And finally, at some point, I'm like, I better go knock on the door and give him an explanation, because they're going to be wondering what is the matter with that guy. And so I try and treat the iPhone like my traditional camera gear. A lot of people with iPhones and Samsung devices, they use an application called Hipstamatic, or they use another one, they use Instagram with a bunch of filters. And what they are is, it's ways to take not a very good picture, and you put a bunch of filters on, you make it look like a painting, or you make it look like a drawing, and it's called iPhoneography, and that's the way most people use their cell phones photographically. For me, I was using very basic equipment. I'm trying to make pictures just like I would with my high-end digital cameras. That's one of the biggest differences about my project. So, and actually it's been a really liberating process, because in my days as a traditional photojournalist, I'd have a big bag on my shoulder, I'd have 2 lenses, 2 camera bodies, I'd have every imaginable focal length of lens from a wide angle to a telephoto, and I would go down there to make my pictures of the tree, and I was a human zoom because all I had was my iPhone and whatever it had on it. And the most important tool photographically is always the eyes behind the camera. And I never could have imagined that I would come up with the variety of visual opportunities that I did, but it was really something. After 19 years in the industry, I didn't realize how much I had learned, how much visual growth I could experience at that point in my career. But there's something about simplifying things. I mean, to me, it became a very liberating process. And I've had people ask me today, you know, do you regret not doing it with your high-end digital gear? And I have no regrets at all, because had I done it with my traditional cameras, it would not be the project, it would not be the book that you guys see today. The day I made this picture, this young woman and her boys were going to be back from Colorado. Her brother was a friend of mine in high school, and so she was following the project. She called me and she said, hey, we're going to be back in Platteville. Is there any chance that you could take me and my 2 boys down to see the tree? Patrick and Doug, and 5 and 7. I said, well, sure. But I said, hey, how early could you have the boys out there? Because as a photographer, the best quality of light is early in the morning or late in the afternoon. And I wanted to, you know, if I'm going to do this, let's try and get you there when there's still good light. So they met me at 8 o'clock. 5-year-old and a 7-year-old boy. It's about 350 yards from the road to the tree. It took us about 45 minutes to get there, because every blade of grass, every bug, every insect needed an explanation. But, you know, that was a really cool experience, too, because it kind of opened my eyes and made me consider some other possibilities. And there's nothing as fresh as seeing the world like a kid, you know. We're all older, we kind of have a jaded perspective. It was really a valuable experience for me. And then, as a photojournalist, it was kind of neat having people in the picture. This is really the only picture I shot in the project other than the silhouette of the farmer on his tractor. But the boys are walking, they're asking the mom questions, they're hand talking, and it just, I really love this. It's really one of my favorites. And so, you know, these boys taught me some lessons about seeing like a child. They taught me some lessons about slowing down, because I would park my truck and I was always in a big hurry to get to the tree. Well, think of all the observations, and since that point, the pictures I made where I've got a foreground element and the trees way down the valley, whatever it might be, but seeing like a kid has been an invaluable thing for me visually. Slowing down, letting myself really see, and I just talk about this whole process, you know. I'd go down there and I was perfectly comfortable, lay there in the grass, lay there in the snow, lay there in the mud, because I went to some pretty extreme measures to make pictures. And socially, some of the things I did, you know, I'm the 50-year-old guy climbing the top of a 60-foot tall bur oak tree, you know. People might think that's a little touched. But I did all these things. I remember I'm laying in the ditch by the road. There's a barbed wire fence. I'm trying to frame the tree through the barbed wire fence, and this car's going by really slow. They're probably thinking, that guy have a heart attack? No, he's just behaving comfortably, doing really foolish things that provided wonderful outcomes. So I say one of the things that tree taught me is it taught me to live life and not worry about it, you know. I don't care what they think. I don't care what they think. It's what I think, and I was perfectly comfortable with the experience. And the rewards that I got from it and the rewards I continue to get from it are well worth anybody having a weird perspective or a weird expectation from the way I behave, because, you know, it doesn't matter. And the last one about a newfound appreciation for place. You think about what our place is. For many of us, it's our community. You think about the impact of losing all the trees in Vinton, Iowa had on you guys several years ago. You just become familiar with these things, and for me, that tree is now my place. I mean, I know where the sun is going to be different times of day. Having experienced that complete change of season for a full season, just amazing. And this is another one of those pictures. I can thank the boys for inspiring me to look closer at the tree. And this one too, I don't know if you can see it, but the moth. So when I started this project, if you'd asked me what I was doing, I would have said, oh, I'm taking pictures of a bur oak tree, because to me it was just a tree at that point. But you know, the more time I spent down there, the more I recognized the impact it has on that ecosystem, the realm of that little valley. You know, it's a monoculture of either corn or soybeans, or in an off year, there's corn in one field and soybeans in the other. That waterway below the tree, it's got all non-native grasses. They're European grasses that have been planted to control erosion. The only native species in that entire valley is that tree, and you know, the old sentinel of the prairie. But the impact it has, what it provides for shelter, you know, the eagles I would see perched in the tree, the songbirds, the deer, the turkey migrating down there to find acorns. You know, I really realize that for that realm, for that valley, it really is the tree of life. So, you know, people ask me, you know, how do you come up with those pictures? And as you look through the book, you'll see that there are compositions that are very duplicative. They're very similar. But so much of photography is about quality of light. And I thought I had this great perspective and great perception and great appreciation for quality of light. But till you turn your eyes on something and your camera on the same subject for every day for a year, you don't realize how much there is to learn. And you don't realize how much impact the quality of light has. I would discover compositions that I thought looked really good, but I would look at them and I'd go, oh, you know what? If I come back at sunset, that's really going to be phenomenal. And so quality of light became crucial to me. I remember the night I made this. I got home. I'd been in Dubuque again on a photo shoot. I walked in the house. I grabbed my tripod. It's lightning. It's thundering outside. And I'm in the door. My family's looking at me. Where are you going? To make a picture. Probably not one of my brightest moves, but boy, it made a nice image. mean, it really is a tree in the middle of a cornfield. And this is a really popular photo, and it's just those observations that I learned to make. So my dog Magnum, he's a German wire-haired pointer. He's really kind of a live wire. It was August 7th, and whenever he would go with me, especially in the summer, I'd bring his collapsible water dish and a bottle of water, and I went down to wait for the sunrise, or sunset, I mean. And I sat down. Magnum's running around the valley. Pretty soon he came over and he sat down beside me, and I poured him some water, and he starts drinking water, and you lucky to see a drop of water dripping off his tongue. And he gets up after drinking water, he puts his head down again, and I look over, I'm like, oh my gosh. I go, Magnum, stay. What? No, Magnum, stay. And there, the scourge of everything green, but boy, it made a nice picture. So this project, you know, I mean, not only was I invested in this project, you know, I really didn't think about it, but holy cow, my family was invested in it too. You know, I'm making all these commitments, I'm making all these personal sacrifices, but our daughter graduated from high school the year of the project, and I remember she comes to me one day, Dad, where are we going for vacation this summer? I'm like, if there's a family vacation, Dad's not going. Too much skin in the game. So it was a pretty crazy investment in time for my whole family. And I certainly didn't really think about it that way, but it really was. And so I've talked a lot about perceptions, and another one, you know, I mean, if you would have asked me, you know, in my newspaper days, Mark, what do you do? I would have said I'm just a photographer. And now looking back at that, what a silly way to describe ourselves. And I think a lot of people do it, you know, I'm just a teacher, I'm just an IT guy. You know, it took this project for me to realize how fortunate I am to have the visual perception I have, the visual aptitude I have. I just took for granted that wasn't anything special, that I could go out there every day and I could look at a scene and I could isolate a vignette and make a picture that I thought was unique and original. But it took this project for me to realize that I'm an artist, and I'm really lucky to have that skill set. And every one of you in this room, you all have your own special skill sets that make you really unique at what you do. So none of us are just anything. And I, you know, people are afraid to express themselves openly and honestly because we're always so worried about what others will think. And that's the other thing about this. I had an English teacher, her name was Lois Wagner, and Lois had a group, it was a creative writing group, and I was kind of a rambunctious kid, but I remember I joined Lois Wagner's creative writing group, and you know, I never imagined that as an adult I would ever utilize those writing skills, but as you look through the book and you look at my daily reflections, I really became very comfortable with writing what I felt, writing what I saw, and they bordered on prose, and a lot of my male friends, they'd give me all kinds of raspberries about what I was writing for captions with my story, but you know what? I came to realize it really doesn't matter because it made me very happy, it made me very comfortable. It made me as happy as my visuals did, and to have somebody send me a note that they liked my picture but they really liked what I wrote, that was really a very rewarding outcome of the project. And so I encourage all of you, you know, it's never too late to pick up painting, pick up drawing, write. It's an incredibly rewarding outcome. So it's September of my project, and I get a phone call one day from a guy named Jim Saida, and Jim Saida was with NBC News, and I'm like, oh, probably Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or somebody is going to be in Dubuque, Iowa. They want me to make a picture. So I said that to him. He said, no, Mark. He said, actually, he says, I sit 2 desks away from Meredith Burkett. And I thought, one of my head, Meredith Burkett. She follows me on Instagram. She's a photo producer that I connected with through another photographer named Casey Madison. And Jim says, Yeah, he says, Meredith finally refers to you as the tree stalker. So they were calling, they were interested in doing a story on me, and even better, so he calls, he conducts an interview, he says, we're going to run it on the NBC photo blog, and it competes with the New York Times Lens blog for readership and viewership. So they said that we want to embargo the story. Would you accept if we pay you $1,000 to not let anyone else do the story for a month? I'm like, well, yeah. So they not only gave me great publicity and they paid me for it, but as a result of that publication, then I picked up 4,000 more followers for that tree. So by this point, it's well over 4,000 followers. Pretty incredible considering it's a tree in the middle of a cornfield in southwest Wisconsin. If you go to my website today, CBS Sunday Morning featured my project in July of last year, and after that story aired, it jumped to 25,000 followers. Now with all the Iowa Public Television, Wisconsin Public Television, and Minnesota Public Television coverage in the last 3 weeks, there are 37,000 people following that tree on Facebook. It's just amazing. So social media really works. This is another one of those photos. I went down there, the corn was harvested. It was one of those howling, windy days, and the wind's blowing, the leaves are flying all the same direction off the tree, and I'm looking, I'm like, oh my gosh, that'd make great pictures. So once again, the neighbor's like, what is he doing? I pre-focused the iPhone on a leaf and comment. I did a lot of running around in that field that day trying to make this picture. This was on election day, and I was hired by Getty Images to take pictures of elections in Wisconsin and in Iowa. And I remember I went out to the local polling place, made my photo, and I came out, and it was one of those early November snowstorms. Big old heavy wet snowflakes, and they were hitting my truck and melting. And I'm like, I have to go to rural Iowa to make a picture. I've got to make my tree picture now. So I drove to the tree, and all those snowflakes are melting on my window, and I thought, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a picture of the tree in focus, and all those out of focus raindrops in my window. So I go to my back seat, I roll down the window, and I lock the focus. I pre-focus on the tree, and then I climb back in my front seat, and I've got this device. I used to hold the iPhone in a tripod, and I connected it to my armrest, put the iPhone in it, and I aimed it at the scene, and I hadn't locked the focus, and the camera back focused on the raindrops with all those inverted trees in it. And I was like, oh my gosh, the camera was telling me you're taking the wrong picture. This is one of those days. It took me a long time to convince myself that it was time to go make a picture of this horrible weather. And then you look at this. I don't know if you can see that little tiny snowflake, but this is actually the shell of an acorn. So, you know, it's no bigger than a nickel. I remember I saw that, and I hadn't taken my tripod down me. And for landscape photography, I discovered that the tripod makes a huge difference. Since a newspaper photographer, I never used a tripod. But for this project, it really became paramount. I went down there that day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that. And I'm trying to handhold it, making pictures, and I'm like, oh, I don't think they're sharp enough. So I ran back to my truck, came down, set up the tripod, put the iPhone in it. I'm getting it all set up, and I knocked it off the tree.
Oh.
So luckily, I'd got one handheld. I was just disgusted. So at some point, there's a magazine out of Iowa called Woodlands and Prairies. It's a really neat magazine, and Raleigh Hankus runs the magazine, and Raleigh wanted to do a story on me. And so he wanted to know the history of the land. So I went to the State Historical Society in Wisconsin, and you can look up for your piece of property, you can find the surveyor's notes from the property. And Lucius Lyons was the surveyor that surveyed this property in the 1830s. And I could read his reflections, and at that time it was prairie. He talks about bur oaks. He talks about setting a bur oak branch as a waypoint. It was really interesting. And so Raleigh also wanted to know how old the tree was. So he connected with a geologist from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, Evan Larson, and Evan came out and he actually core sampled the tree. And we were able to determine that the tree is hollow, still very healthy because the vascular layer is healthy, but it's hollow, and he was able to determine the tree is 165 years old. So it's not as old as all of us speculated. And then while getting additional information for Raleigh, he wanted me to go to the Register of Deeds and track who owned the property when and at what point was it possibly tilled. And so I went to the Register of Deeds, and I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but this is big bound volumes, and the way it works, the title doesn't follow the land, it follows the next owner. And I went through so many volumes, I finally gave up. And I told Raleigh, I can't find this, it's just I don't have the time. So he calls me the next day, he says, oh, isn't there some other option? So I thought, oh, I'll call one of those title companies. So I called the title company in Lancaster, Wisconsin, and the lady answers the phone, and I asked her what it cost to do a title search, and she said it's $50. I'm like, I'm not paying $50 to get this information for somebody to write an article on me. And I said to her, well, I'm working on this article for a magazine. They're going to do a story on this photo project where I made a picture a day of a tree, and she goes, that tree? I'm like, I'm in. So she was able, the way their company works, the title follows the land, so you could see who the owners were. And this land was owned by the John Vine family from 1869 until 1989. In 1989, the last descendant of that family sold it at auction. The farmer that bought it, his name was Bob Digman, and apparently it had been in pasture all that time. So Bob tilled the soil for the first time in 1989, so that's a big reason why the tree was still there. And then the night I made this photo, I had been in Madison shooting photos of Barack Obama for a campaign appearance, and I'd already made a nice picture of the tree that day. And I remember I'm driving back to Platteville, and I'm looking at that sunset. I'm about to Belmont, some about, oh, I don't know, 15, 20 miles from Platteville. I'm like, oh, wow, that's going to be a really cool sunset. But I'm like, I already got my picture today. And I get to Platteville, and it's the colors are even more vivid and robust. I'm like, oh my gosh. Now again, I'm 6 miles from the tree, and now suddenly I'm inspired. I want to make that picture. So remember, I got to the tree, I grabbed my tripod, I ran down there, and if you aim the iPhone at something like this, there's nothing bright, so it tries to overexpose. And I made a really cool discovery with the iPhone, that if I aim a flashlight at the sensor, it will use a faster shutter speed and allow me to capture that incredible vivid color. So it was kind of a pretty funny workaround. I carry a pocket flashlight. And just an example of different perspectives, this picture of the tree is made from the south looking north. 10 minutes later, that's a picture from the north looking south. What a radical difference. And so one of the really cool outcomes of this project is just the engagement I've been able to accomplish with people through Facebook. And people are just amazed, because you know, Facebook is usually self-serving, it's all about me sort of stuff. But I tried to use it to share something that people found really interesting and really unique. It wasn't so much about me, it was about sharing a really interesting experience. And so people just, you know, they found it incredibly inspiring. And I love the one, I'm learning to look at my yard in a new way. And this guy is a gentleman I know, his name is Terry Cushman, and Terry had a rough fence line in his backyard, and he was going to do much like the farmer, bring in a bulldozer and eliminate it. But after following my project for a while, he decided he was going to do something more constructive. And he was going to keep the trees, and he was going to maintain it as a piece of habitat. But so, my daily responsibility as that tree guy, I get up in the morning and I respond to people's emails, and I'm kind of the voice of that tree. And after that CBS Sunday Morning piece came out, it probably took me 3 weeks to respond. I responded to almost 1,000 people with personal messages. And I was sitting there one morning, I'm responding to all these personal messages, and I got a note from a woman, and she said, Mark, she said, I wrestle with depression. She said, I anticipate your photo. Every day it's a bright spot in my day. And I sent her back a note. I said, hey girl, keep on smiling. Remember, every day is a good day. And the every day is a good day thing is a statement my dad makes. And you know, having been through my crazy experience and near-death experience, the emotional challenges, the struggles I dealt with, it's changed my perspective, it's changed my outlook on life. And that saying, every day is a good day, is something my dad says. My dad, 4 years ago, was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And unlike me, my dad was really good. Every year he'd go in annually and get his PSA test. He'd gone in one year, got his PSA test, it was marginal to normal. The next year he went in and it was 375, and he had full-blown, fully metastasized bone cancer. So that saying, every day is a good day, really means something. So 10 minutes after I sent that message to the girl, I get another message pops up, and it was from her, and she says, Mark, she says, I just ordered an autographed copy of your book. Can you please inscribe it with that message? And of course I did. So what we do, guys, makes a big difference, and it's kind of a crazy situation that my experience has allowed me to have that much impact on so many people. And the really cool thing is that I've given voice to a tree, and it's inspired people in many ways. It's challenged them to take a look at how they live and take a look at what's important or what isn't important, you know. It took a crazy experience for me to realize that some things really don't really matter that much. So, well, hopefully that tree can inspire you and touch you in a similar way. And with that, I'm going to wrap up and ask if anybody has any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever taken your family there?
Our family's been there, but they're not nearly as excited about it as Dad is. But you cannot believe now the number of people that flock to the tree to make pictures. Tim, the farmer, one day says, yeah, Mark, he says, I was spraying the bean field on the other side of County Road D. He came up over the hill with his big sprayer behind his tractor to go spray the beans down by the tree, and there was a van and a family down there making pictures. So he said, I guess I'll spray a different field. But it's really cool because he really recognizes and appreciates the circumstances and the situation, and there are other farmers that probably wouldn't be too excited about it. But yeah, it's become a very popular place. Yes?
If it's hollow inside, how come it hasn't blown over?
It's pretty solid. You know, the hollow was probably almost a foot into the tree before you get to it. And honestly, the geologist that did the core sample for me, his field of study, he writes grants, federal grants, and that's all he does is research oak trees. And he said a huge number of the big old oaks are hollow, so it's not uncommon.
So has this opened another door for future projects? Do you see something from this into the future, or are you involved typically